My name is Kevin Kruger. I'm the president of NASPA, and I'm going to spend the next half hour or so talking about the landscape of careers in student affairs and some of the options you might have available for working in that field. So what is student affairs? Student affairs is essentially the organizational structure of units that support the out-of-class experience for students. And I like to think of that as being a sort of a two-peer, two-column system within higher education. The curricular, where the classes take place, and the faculty instruction takes place, and then the co-curricular. They both work together. They enhance each other to create a unified, holistic student experience. Student affairs and NASPA are concerned with the jobs supporting that co-curricular experience. The great thing about student affairs is for those of you who are grad students who are considering this, it is we like to call it a noble profession. It is a profession that is about trying to improve the quality of life on campus for students. It's about student success, creating educational opportunities for students outside the classroom, and to empower students to make a difference in their lives. Now, as you think about student affairs careers, you can see it represents a wide range of different types of jobs and opportunities. You might think of student affairs historically or traditionally as being a job in a residence hall, working with students who live on campus, and while that is a major component of many student affairs jobs, you can see that it really spans the realm of all kinds of different ways in which we interact with students on campus. It's also important to note that as you think about a career in student affairs, that you're looking at many types of institutional type that might provide some nuance to the kind of jobs that you get. So, for example, most of you are familiar with, and we've been most familiar with, the traditional 4-year public or private residential college where students live on campus and go for 4 years. And that's just one sector where there are student affairs jobs, but there are also other opportunities, and one of the growing and most fastest growing sectors is the community college sector, which is becoming one of the major access points for access to higher education for many people. And the ways in which we work with students in that sector is just as important and valuable, and there are many jobs in that area as well. Also, there's different sort of niche institutions or different types of institutions, like Hispanic-serving institutions or historically black colleges and universities that serve a specific population. And again, that might be something that might be a fit for some of the folks in the audience as you're thinking about institutional type. Lastly, I just want to comment that the for-profit sector is expanding. You might see this in the news. But as the for-profit experience expands, and which means that largely those students are taking online classes, we're also seeing a lot more student support services come to line on those institutions as well. So as you think about entering the field of higher education and student affairs, I want to just tick through a couple of key issues that are affecting higher education. And this little picture of the guy in the middle, for those of you who are old enough to know, is John Belushi. But kind of gets at this idea that there's a lot of pressure right now on college and universities from a variety of different ways, and that's going to affect the work of student affairs. As you think about preparing a career in student affairs, you want to be thinking about some of these trends that are affecting us. You know, one of the first things to note is that we're in a period of time where the public is paying attention to higher education in a way that we've never seen before. And this cover from Time magazine is illustrative of that. And it may be too hard for you to read, but there's a couple of points in there, like, for example, in the middle of the page, it says 80% think college isn't worth the money. Or the fact that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney talked about how to fix higher education. The fact that even presidential candidates in their debate were mentioning higher education and Pell Grants and college access tells you that we're under a period of really enormous scrutiny for higher education. And some of the scrutiny is not very positive. One of the books that came out several years ago by Richard Arum, called Academically Adrift, really says that, despite all the money we're putting into colleges, that students really aren't learning very much. And that provides some pressure on the work that we do. And we have crazy things like, and I'm sorry to offend anybody from Florida, but the governor of Florida was talking about pegging tuition to higher rates for liberal arts students and lower rates for STEM students to kind of address the employability issue. But bottom line is that higher education really is at a kind of a tipping point and a place where there's a lot of transformation taking place. And I really want to talk about a few of those examples, which are that a very strong emphasis on looking at trying to increase the number of students who are graduating from college. I want to talk about demographics briefly, technology, and changes in learning. One of the most interesting things is that as you think about entering higher education and student affairs work, is there's a lot of attention being played on what's called the completion agenda. And that's basically the fact that the U.S. needs more college graduates. We don't have enough college graduates. And in fact, the data suggests from the Lumina Foundation that we need about 800,000 more college graduates each year to meet our workforce demands. I'm reminded of a story that about when Obama was first president. He called Steve Jobs into his office to ask him what would it take for Apple to have more jobs in the United States rather than exporting them elsewhere. And his answer to that was 50,000 engineers. Well, that would address sort of an issue that we're just not simply graduating enough high, talented, qualified candidates to meet the needs of the workforce. There's another kind of interesting view of this that's called the undereducated American that Carnevale and Rose did out of Georgetown. And they did an interesting study that gets at really what's taking place when you don't have enough college graduates is the creation of an economic disparity in our country. So this slide kind of shows this a little bit. The fact that from 1915 to 1990, the amount of college graduates was about equal to the demand for those jobs, for college graduates. Since 1990, however, we've begun to see an increasing gap between the number of graduates and the demand for those graduates. What that means in real terms is, if you can extend this on the left-hand side, is that we're going to see a larger gap developing between what we need and what we have. So there's some suggestion that if we just increase that 2% a year, we could begin to close that gap. Now, on the right-hand side, it shows the power of this, and that is in 1980, the difference between the economic earning power of graduates versus non-graduates was about 40%. In 2010, that went to 74%. If we continue on our current trend to 2025, it will be 96%. This has enormous effect on our society as you think about a class system developing between those who can afford higher education and have a college degree and who don't. And so the argument of Carnevale and Rose is we need to close that gap so that we can get to a place where the difference is more like 46%. You know, this last recession taught us a lot, and that is that the unemployment rate of those who have a college degree was significantly lower than those who didn't. And the median earning of those who have a college degree is significantly higher. And so it's very important that as a nation that we think about how we're going to increase our degree completion. Well, how are we doing right now? Here's a chart from the Lumina Foundation which talks about the fact that we're about 40%, and we need to get to 60%. That's that 800,000 college graduate increase per year. If you disaggregate the data, you find some interesting things, which is that among students of color, in particular Black, Hispanic, and Native American, the completion rate is significantly lower than white students and Asian students. And so we have a lot of work to do as we think about how that's going to happen. So how are we going to get to that 60%? It's through a lot of the work that Student Affairs is going to do. And the reason I mention all this and this trend is if you're thinking about a job in Student Affairs, think about articulating your role and the positions that are going to be available in the ways in which your jobs may support the persistence and completion of the students on your campus. And that's going to happen in some ways that Student Affairs has been involved with for quite a while, but you also, as a candidate, want to think about how you articulate your contribution to that effort. Persistence and retention efforts have long been a part of Student Affairs. All the engagement activities we do in Student Affairs, which essentially are the ways in which students connect to faculty and staff and each other in meaningful ways. The creation of inclusive communities, which means finding a home for students so that they feel engaged and safe no matter their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and then making sure that the academic and social support networks are in place. That's all part of the Student Affairs role, and it's all part of how we're going to support degree completion. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is demographics. You need to know you're entering a higher education field and landscape that's changing dramatically. And it's changing dramatically by virtue of who's coming to college. Now, one of the interesting things about demographics is that we know who's coming to college next year because they were born 18 years ago. And so we actually know who's coming in the next 18 years as well. You can't change that except for immigration. It's already pretty much baked in who's going to be coming to college. And that is changing dramatically, and largely it's changing by a significant increase in the number of Hispanic Latino students who will be entering the college market and graduating from high school. We already know they're here, they were born, they're here, and they're coming, and that's going to make some significant changes in the higher education landscape. What you need to know about some of the new students coming to college is that they are increasingly first generation, meaning that their parents did not go to college. and so their experience with college is going to be a new experience. They're increasingly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and many come from school districts that have with less academic preparation. So their academic and social support needs are going to be greater. And so again, as you think about entering this landscape as a job, you need to think about a landscape that's going to be increasingly racially and ethnically more diverse. We're expecting Hispanic high school graduates to rise by 35%, and then by 2020, we're going to see about 5% fewer white students than there were in 1994 in that time period, and a 174% increase in Hispanic students. So again, this is a very critical and important issue. If we're going to get to 60% retention rate and completion rate by our college graduates, we're going to need to simply do a better job in supporting and academically and socially supporting, in particular, many of our first generation Hispanic Latino students and other subsects as well. So again, back to the job market. These are some of the things you might want to be able to talk about or think about in terms of your own career advancement. Nothing's more kind of timely and newsworthy as another trend than technology. Technology is changing lots of things. It certainly is changing our own personal worlds. But I think what ripped out of the headlines are some things about the way that technology is going to change the learning enterprise. Now, Bill Gates of Microsoft fame said in 2010 that 5 years from now, you'll be able to find the best lectures in the world. It'll be better than any single university for free. Now, he also said college, except for the parties, needs to be less place-based. I wish he hadn't said the party part because I think it undermines really some of the serious work that we do with students. However, if you look at that statement, and he said that in 2010, 5 years from now, he was wrong. It wasn't 5 years from now, it was 2 years from now, because 2012 was a watershed moment for something that's taken place in higher education, which is along the lines of something called disruptive technology. Now, disruptive technology is, for those of you who've been around a little while, is what happened to Blockbuster. Blockbuster used to go into a store and used to put your money down. You walked away with, at some point, a VHS tape, and then increasingly it was a DVD. And then a little company called Netflix came along, and they started developing a model where they would send you that DVD in the mail, and you didn't have to get out of bed and take off your pajamas. You could just go to your mailbox and get your DVD and mail it back. Now, what happened there is that Blockbuster was such a big enterprise, they couldn't fiddle around with new and experimental technologies and way of doing things. They had their stores, and they kept investing in those stores. Disruptive technology occurs when someone at the low end develops a technology or an innovation, and then by the time the big company realizes it, it's too late and that one takes over. Well, Blockbuster now is owned by, I think, Dish Network, and there's very few Blockbuster stores even available any longer. Well, the same thing's happening, or could happen, in higher education. If you've been reading the news, you've been seeing a lot of talk about MOOCs, which are massive open online courses, and they're being developed by some of the companies listed in this slide. edX, Udacity, Coursera are the three big players. And what this is creating is a disruption to delivery. In the delivery of the actual ways in which we think about classroom instruction and what the college experience might be like. This is happening so fast. If you're coming into higher education, you need to be aware that what's the essence of this is that college is going to be less place-based. I don't think it's going to be an elimination of the brick and mortar traditional institutions, but clearly the student experience is going to be increasingly virtual and less place-based. There's a lot of money that's being pumped into this, and a lot of students are experimenting with this process. You can see the numbers here: 160,000 in Stanford's course. Coursera has 680,000 students, and these numbers have probably gone up already. What does this mean for student affairs and the work you're going to do? What it means is that we're going to have to adapt our work to be both place-based, to support students in the way we currently do now, but also we're going to need to engage students in that virtual space as well, because what's for sure going to happen is that increasingly many institutions are going to begin to offer these massive open online courses as one way of achieving college credit. It's already starting to happen in some institutions that are partnering with Coursera. And so this is the part of the landscape you need to also be aware of. Last thing I want to talk about is civic learning. Now, that's an interesting thing to talk about related to student affairs jobs. But there's been a lot of attention paid recently to a deficit that we have in the United States in civic engagement. So, for example, the United States ranks 139th out of 172 democracies in voter participation. We saw this again in this last election. Only 10% of citizens actually contacted a public official or engaged in that part of the civic discourse. And then in 2006 and 2007, when there was a survey of 14,000 college seniors, and their average score in civic literacy was just over 50%, which really calculates out to an F. So that's part of the challenge we have. And we see this every day in terms of what's happening in the public sector related to civic engagement. And Congress, for example. There was a survey, I'm sure some of you saw this on the news, about ranking Congress to other things in the world in terms of what's more popular. And what we found is that Congress is less popular than Genghis Khan, less popular than replacement referees, less popular than lice, because at least you can get rid of lice. And finally, shockingly, less popular than Brussels sprouts. Well, I say that kind of humorously, but the point is that we have a challenge in front of us relating to civic learning and democratic engagement. We need to do more of this with our students. We need to engage our students civically, get them involved in the community, get them involved thinking about the skill set and the competencies required to be a civic-minded person. And what we know about civic engagement is that students who are more civically engaged stay in college. They persist in college and complete their degrees at a higher rate. We also know that they develop a set of skills and competencies that are valued by employers. And this is sort of an important piece to kind of reinforce. As we think about what employers want out of this survey that Association of American Colleges and Universities did, you look at these numbers here. They want more civic knowledge. They want more cultural diversity, more intercultural competence, which is the ability to get along with others from different backgrounds and different groups, more abilities to solve complex problems, to apply ethical decision-making in the work that they do in their business setting. Critical thinking and analytical reasoning, to take complex issues, understand the various issues, and come to some conclusion about them. Those are all key things that employers want that relate to civic learning and democratic engagement. Now, for those of you in the student affairs field and graduate programs around the country who are preparing to work in this field, you'll know that these items here are ripped right out of the student affairs playbook. If you're going to work in student affairs, think about this as part of your syllabus. These are the things that we do with students. We create opportunities to develop these skills and competencies, A, to make them an educated person and a civically engaged person, and B, also because that's what employers are looking for in their candidates once students graduate from college. So, sketched out 4 big issues: the college completion persistence issue, the change in demographics, the change in technology and the way it's affecting learning, and then lastly, this kind of focus on what some people call the soft skills of education, or you might also call the co-curricular outcomes of higher education, and how important those things are. You know, it's interesting when you think about student affairs that when you interview pretty much anybody, and I would guarantee that most of the people in this webinar, if I asked you 3 years after graduation to talk about the most meaningful parts of your college experience, it's rarely the physics class. It's rarely the English comp class. It tends to be the things that took place in the college experience, in that holistic experience that sometimes we call the co-curriculum. And that's the world that student affairs operates in, and it's a very important world. But while there's some traditional things taking place in higher education, it's important also to know that jobs are changing. That cartoon I'll just read to you. It says, the guy on the left saying, "You kids today with your cloud computers and your Google Docs, in my day we attached files to our emails and we liked it that way." The guy on the right says, "Dave, you're like 2 years older than me." Well, it's the idea that jobs are changing and they're changing really quick. And so in student affairs, jobs are changing also. And so I want to spend a little time talking about what you need to think about in terms of new competencies that are a part of the student affairs curriculum. The first one is with finances being tight. If you're thinking about trying to get into an area, these are both new competencies as well as new jobs. We're seeing a lot of new job postings, full-time staff who work raising funds in student affairs. That's certainly a new job title, but it's also an emerging competency. So if you have that skill, you can ask people for money. Think about ways in which you can expand that in your current experience, or talk about that, because that might be that'll be an attractive competency as you look at getting hired into your first job or your second job. That goes beyond just asking somebody for $1 million. Sometimes it means walking down the street to your college town and asking restaurants to donate to a fundraiser. So the ability to ask for money is an important competency that's emerging. Probably nothing is more important than the assessment competency. We've seen also, again, new job titles. 10 years ago, you could put all the full-time assessment professionals in the country around a round table. Now we're seeing This being both a core competency and hundreds of jobs popping up in the assessment area. And what this really is about, for those of you who are not engaged in student affairs, is how do we provide evidence for the value of what takes place in the college experience? How do we assess learning that's taking place outside the classroom? How do we assess some of those soft skills that we talked about? Which programs are more effective? All those are pieces of creating sort of evidence-based approaches to the work that we do with our students. It's also important to note that with the increase in mental health issues that students are facing on campus and the number of students with serious psychological health issues that are coming to campus, new job titles are emerging as well. And we are seeing more and more vice presidents for student affairs and student affairs divisions hiring case managers. This comes right out of the counseling mental health area, and this is folks who are trying to track students who show up in the police report and a residence hall report, who aren't showing up to class, trying to find thematic cases where we can look at what's taking place with students across the spectrum of their institutional experience and to provide appropriate support and outreach for them, whether it be counseling or mental health support or academic support. And in particular for students who have serious psychological issues, to make sure they don't fall through the cracks. And with issues like college student suicide and other issues being a major driver in what we do with students in trying to prevent acts of violence and suicide, these case managers are an important piece as well. If you work in higher education, it's also probably worth noting that compliance issues are really kind of increasing dramatically. So if you have a job where you could develop, or you do your homework and understanding some of the compliance issues that are facing higher ed, that can also be a key competency that you might want to think about developing. And I'm just going to name off things like Title IX and Title II have significant federal regulations associated with them that fall on the student affairs professionals to enact. And so some understanding of that would be helpful as well. And the last one I want to just talk about is social media and communications. Again, this is an area that is kind of expanding, and you're seeing both full-time positions in social media, so you're seeing people hiring just for social media to report to student affairs as part of an overall strategic direction for how student affairs professionals communicate with students. And the key here is that we need to meet students where they are. They're increasingly engaged in social media, no surprise to anyone. So it's important as we think about how we work with students that we're using social media to enable that. I also think that social media is becoming a core competency for all student affairs work. It's rarely taught in graduate preparation programs, and if we have any graduate faculty out there, I think this is something that is an emerging area that we need to be looking at, the ways in which we can use social media for engagement, interaction with students, student support, and I think that's an important piece that we should be developed. So again, as you think about your own work and how you might want to leverage that, you would find that if you can talk about social media from a strategic standpoint and the ways you use it as a communications tool and an engagement tool, that no matter the job, whether it's in residence life, student activities, or academic advising, this is a competency that I think will resonate with many folks in the employer market. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple just things about opportunities. Many of you in this audience are going to participate in the job search this spring, and both NASPA and ACPA have a job service. I want to talk about the NASPA program, which is a consortium of associations. We represent both HigherEd.com, who's the sponsor of this webinar, and NASPA, of course, CUHO-I, who is the Housing and Residence Life folks, which is about 90% of the jobs. For first-year entry-level jobs, NACA, which is the student activities folks, ASCA, which is student conduct, AFA, fraternities and sororities, NODA, orientation. You can find all this on the website, but it's a consortium, all the types of jobs you'd find in student affairs. We all come together for a 3-day period, and this year it's going to be in Orlando. And some of the data would just show you what we've got here. During this 3-day period, about 9,500 interviews will be conducted on site. There'll be about 900 candidates. There'll be somewhere like about 1,000 employers on site representing about 670 to 700 positions. I'll say that because we're in Orlando this year and last year we were in Phoenix, because more universities on the East Coast, we're going to see probably about a 20% increase in the number of jobs posted. And so this is about a 2,000 to 2,500 person operation between candidates and employers, and a very vibrant operation. So if you're looking for a job, this is particularly in the entry-level area. It's a great way to kind of get exposed to what's taking place in the job market within student affairs. couple things just to think about in terms of your job search if you haven't already. There's kind of multiple ways to go, but you might want to just think about the fact that some people choose more of a generalist position or approach, which is, I'd say kind of horizontal, looking at jobs that have a wide range of areas that you're responsible for. You might find that in many small college and universities where you might have one job doing 2 or 3 different areas. Or do you want to be a specialist or an expert in a specific area? Some people like or want to focus just on Greek life, for example, and spend their time in fraternity and sororities, or housing and residence life, or orientation, or multicultural and diversity. So you just kind of think about what fits you, whether you want that kind of diversity in responsibilities, or you'd rather just focus on one specific area. I mentioned institutional type before. It's very important that you think about what kind of place are you want to be working, and that institutional fit is very important. So large, small, rural, city, HBCU, public, four-year, elite, think about all that, and think about the mission and values of that institution and how that fits your particular interests and needs, because that institutional fit is very important. And while we're on the subject of diversity, I think it's important also to think about and ask questions about and do your homework about the institutional type and the values of that institution. We found in our surveys that about 65% of our institutions are offering domestic partner benefits. Sexual expression or gender identity are included in their non-discrimination policies for about 81%. But if you flip that, that means 19% of the institutions don't include that, and you want to know that going in no matter what your personal situation is. Understand the institution you're going to be joining. Last thing, just couple quick tips. As you're thinking about entering the job process, understand that in any interview, whether it be in Skype or real life, that the first 2 minutes are critical, and you need to do your homework and have your preparation done. Have your elevator speech ready. Be able to answer those basic questions. You're going to be prepared to answer. Why are you applying for this job? Why do you want to work at that institution? Every person who works at an institution is proud of their institution, and they want you to apply to a job and be excited about that as well. So do your homework about the institution. Make sure that you have thought adequately through how you support and connect to the mission of that institution. Understand the ethics of the job search. And for those of you particularly who are new to student affairs, it's a very, very small profession. You're never more than 2 degrees of separation around from knowing somebody or somebody who knows you. And so how you build your brand, how you pretend yourself in both the interview situation and the job selection process is something that's going to follow you for a long time. And I say this to the young people: make sure you make good ethical decisions about your job. So I'm going to finish with, before we take some questions, with some lessons from Steve Jobs. If you've read his biography, you've made some interesting things that have come out, the analysis of what happened in Steve Jobs' life. And if you didn't know this, when he and Steve Wozniacki founded Apple in the garage, it took about 10 years for them to kind of create the first Macintosh computer and to create basically what was a $2 billion enterprise for Apple after about 10 years. And what you may not know is that after 10 years, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. He lost his job. They pushed him out. As a result of that, he had to kind of do some things. And one of the things he did was he founded Pixar, and that created Toy Story, and created some new technologies, and essentially rebuilt and recast himself, and eventually got back into Apple. And Apple became the company that it is. But he has some interesting things to say about what occurred, and I think those are good lessons for us as I wrap up about thinking about student affairs. These are challenging times, okay? So you expect adversity and use that adversity to your advantage. Don't lose faith in the fact that things are changing and the landscape is changing so much. Find what you love. This ought to be a job that you look forward to every single day. And since work's going to be a big part of life, he said, the only way to truly be satisfied is do what you believe is great work. And so this really fits nicely with student affairs because what we do is great work. It's noble work. It benefits society. It benefits individual students. You can make a difference in people's lives with this work. And so I think in that regard, it's very powerful. And if you haven't found it yet, if you're still looking, then keep looking. Don't settle. That's an important part of the job process. So lastly, before I take questions, I just want to say that I am on social media. I'm on Twitter at NASPAPrez. And I will tell you that if you follow me, I'll never tell you what I had for breakfast or what movie I saw. I only talk about higher education and some of the things that we're actually talking about today. So we've got a couple of questions kind of called in. I want to just address a few of these in the time we have. Had John C. asked a question that I thought was a good start. And he said he's worked for a few years as an adjunct professor. and that's the only higher ed experience he's had. In what ways would this experience be helpful or not helpful for a career in student affairs? And how could he improve his credibility as a candidate? Well, student affairs is in essence a teaching profession. What we do is teaching. So your experience as a faculty member or a teacher, whether it be in K through 12 or in college, has the elements of how you work with students in a developmental way, how you engage students in the learning process. So I would say all those are very relevant, and you need to think about student affairs as a classroom. The classroom, though, is the out-of-class classroom, and so how we engage students there. So I think there's some very significant transferability opportunities there that I think you might look at, John. Another question that came in was from Tamika. She says, I teach a first-year seminar class, and I'm not sure if employers are expecting to see a CV, which is a curriculum vitae, or a resume. I'd say for the work that we do, a resume is fine. Now, if you're applying for a faculty position, the CV would be more relevant, but a resume, I think, would be perfect for the kind of jobs that we're looking at. Liz wrote in and asked, said she's thinking about working for a nonprofit organization that works with low-income families that helps support them before college. And she's wondering that after a couple of years of doing that, could she get back to student affairs, or was that work irrelevant? Well, Liz, I'd say, think about that section we talked about with demographics. I think the work you're doing in supporting access for low-income families and helping them get to college is very much aligned with the work that we're doing within student affairs, and again, is very transferable. You'll know through that experience a lot about student success and access, about the demographic we just talked about, and I think you could translate that into jobs in advising, in admissions, in academic support, in a variety of other areas in student affairs that I think would be relevant. So I'd say, pursue your dream if that's what you want. You may end up staying in that area, but you certainly aren't losing a step if you wanted to come back. Scott asked, for new professionals, how long do you think it's important to stay in that first full-time position? Scott's a great question. And I would say, for me, the starting place is 2 years. I think that it takes you 8 to 9 months to even be of any value in your first job. So the institution's making an investment in you. And for that first entry-level job, I think 2 years is the minimum. And I think as long as you're upfront with your employer that you might be looking afterwards, I think it's okay to look after that. I'd say 2 to 4 years. But you certainly, if you've gotten a good experience and felt like you've learned some things, and you're ready to move on, those 2 years may be enough. If you leave after the first year, or a little after the first year, or under a year. It's not to say your career is ruined, because you may not be in a situation. Maybe you got in a bad job and the supervisor's not a good fit, or what. You can do that once, but don't let your resume be kind of cluttered with a bunch of one-off kind of opportunities, because that will be a deficit for you as you go further. Cessna asked, what are the greatest challenges facing higher education, and how is technology affecting the role of student affairs? Well, we talked about that a little bit, Cessna, but I think that, and I think really one of the greatest challenges for us are really two things, or several things. One is that we are looking at a reduction in resources within higher education, and we have seen some contraction in the number of student affairs jobs out there. This is sort of a reality check for those of you in the audience here. At the same time, the demands, what we're being asked to do, have never been greater. And I'll just comment on the student mental health issue in particular. The number of students who are coming to campus with serious psychological issues is higher than ever. And the kind of support necessary to help them succeed is staff intensive. It's not virtual. It's one-to-one. It's connected. It's with the counseling center. It's with the advising center. It's with the residence life staff. And so that's a very significant part of what we do. That takes human resources. I think what we need to think about is how we can use technology to free us up to have the time with those students, to interact with other students, the students who don't need as much support, in a virtual space. And I think Student Affairs has been a little slow, frankly, in developing strategies to engage students in the virtual space. Now, there's some campuses that are doing an amazing job out there, and I think about places like Boston University and Butler and other places that are really engaging students in actively in the social media space and really creating an engagement model. In other words, helping students connect to the institution using technology. So if you've got Cessna, if you have that competency, I would say just keep at it, and you're going to be a very valuable asset to folks on campus. We have a Twitter question from @Julie Carson. What is the disruptive technology you see in your daily student affairs life? Well, I think the disruptive technology for student affairs is coming from places and entities that are able to offer what we call student support and student services, perhaps at a less expensive price point. And I'm going to point to the for-profit colleges, I think, and the folks who are doing online education is a great example of that. There's been a pretty strong history of not in the online education world for creating meaningful interactions with students, student communities, student engagement, student government. They form clubs and organizations. They form communities that are discussing complex issues about diversity and race. And they do that in a much leaner fashion than we do. And I think that that's a disruptive technology that's coming from our own internal sector. But I think that the other piece is going to, the other disruptive technology is, I think that organizations like Coursera, I believe, will also begin to think about not just courses that can be taken online, but other competencies that may be able to be gained in an online environment to match what employers want. So I do see some of that as well. Another Twitter question @Cody Rap 2, I think, I'm not sure that is. How do you articulate your contribution to student affairs? And if I understand your question correctly, it's like, so how do we tell our story about the impact of what we do with students? And that gets back to what I talked about before in terms of assessment. You can do that both in the qualitative stories about how we've helped students, but really as you think about resource allocation and how presidents are making decisions and how the public wants to view higher education, we need data. One of the best things that's come about right now is this whole trend towards big data or analytics, and how we can interpret what's taking place with large numbers of data to create an understanding of the student experience. Great. Let me give you a great example of that. Many of your campuses you've been working on have something that's called the One Card. That means that every time a student goes and attends an event, goes to the cafeteria, goes to the library, swipes the card, swipes the card, swipes the card. There's some institutions now that are taking all that big data and beginning to analyze a picture of student engagement. And one institution in particular began to understand that students who were actively engaged in attending events and going to clubs and organizations and attending things on campus, those engaged students had higher grade point averages and had a higher completion rate than those who didn't. It also gives you a powerful opportunity on the backside to look at students who aren't contributing or aren't engaged in, and then to reach out to them and see if there's some programs or services or referrals that will help connect them better to the institution. But the bottom line is, Cody, is that as we have to be thinking about the ways in which data supports and underscores the work that we do. And that's something, again, that we've been sort of short of in our time, but we're getting better at it. Another Twitter question. Timasek says, how do we adjust our jobs when students are more first-gen, more diverse, lower socioeconomic, and less academic preparation? Well, I think that's a great question. I've been doing a lot of speaking about this as I go out around the country. And one of the things I've observed, and I think your question is right to this point, is that we are not organizationally set up to handle the significant influx of students who are going to need more support. We have work to do in a couple areas. We don't know enough about what works with first-generation students in terms of actual degree completion and success in college. We need more data about that. And we're simply going to need more bodies on the ground, more boots on the ground in terms of staff who are going to be able to help support folks who are coming from those backgrounds. I also think that this is a pipeline question. NASPA, some of you in the audience may know, has a program called the NASPA Undergraduate Fellows Program, and it's designed to attract historically underserved and underrepresented students into the student affairs profession. Many of you from the NUF program are maybe on this call right now. One of the things we know about student success is from a faculty standpoint as well as a staff standpoint. is that students from diverse backgrounds need to see people on the campus that look like them. So we need more student affairs professionals of color. We need more student affairs professionals who represent Asian Pacific Islander populations and Native American, Hispanic Latino, and Black and African American, so that can create a support network for those students who are entering, so that they can engage in conversations with them about their success. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I hope that this has been a good experience for everybody here, and I invite you to engage with me offline if you have an interest in continuing this dialogue. The last question says, I have a great deal of experience teaching at a middle and secondary school level. This is coming from Ellen, but I'm eager to transition to a post-secondary education, but not as a professor. How can I best adapt my skills? You know, Ellen, I think this is not an easy transition. I do think that that the kind of work you're doing with student success at the K through 12 area is transferable, but you're also competing against many candidates who are coming out of master's programs that are specifically preparing them to do higher ed work. I would say the best thing that I would imagine, I don't know how you fit this into your to your work life, but perhaps in the summertime when you have time in between terms. See if you can find a paid or unpaid internship or apprenticeship on a local college or university. Get some actual experience. The thing about student affairs that's important to know is this is an applied profession. You can read about it, you can study it, but you got to do it. And so experience is a big part of this work. You do have good experience, Ellen, in the teachings, and I do believe that there's a lot of that's transferable, just like the question John had earlier about being an adjunct professor. But having some tangible experience on a college campus would be useful. So again, I look at I think you'd find a lot of interest in doing some kind of internship or practicum, paid or unpaid, on a campus that used your skills, and then you'd be able to develop a portfolio that help you do that. Yeah, the biggest challenge, though, Ellen, is that you maybe have been a teacher for 5 years. You may have to take a small step back in order to get into the student affairs realm, because that may make you more competitive. Okay, last question from Katie. What resources, coursework, professional organizations would you recommend in order to catch up on the student affairs background? There were things I did not get in grad school. Well, Katie, if you're not a member of a professional association, you need to be. And I can't help but just at least say join NASPA, because you would get access to a whole range of communities and professionals and articles and resources that would help catch you up. But it doesn't have to be NASPA. It could be any professional association. I think it's easier. You'll have great access if you can join a community of learners who are interested in the same things you are. So some of our TPE placement exchange partners, ACUHO-I and NACA and NODA, AFA and ASCA, those folks. I'm sorry for the alphabet soup folks who don't know all these things, but go to our website. You can find it. There's a lot of free stuff out there, but I would say that would be the place that I would start to try to kind of catch up a little bit. That's really the nature of professional associations, because it's not just the resources, Katie. It's also the people that you're going to interact with. And there's some great virtual conversations taking place in many of these associations that would help get you up to speed, and attend a couple conferences. So. All right. If you are interested in this, there are Investing Our Future webinars that NASPA offers for folks who are interested in this. Go to our website; they're free. We'll tell you more about that. Again, as I said before, follow me on NASPA Prez. I want to thank everybody for taking their lunch hour and thinking about careers in student affairs. I've been a 30-year student affairs professional. I love this work. It's important work. It's important to our world, and I thank you for your interest in that and your time you spent. Have a great day.